Conspiracy with political research specialist Mae Brussell, who for 3 years has shared with us her decades' research into political assassinations and abuses of power in this country.
As soon as you see me turning these up, you're on.
Yeah, I hear it.
As soon as you see me turning these up, you're on.
Good afternoon. This is Dialogue Conspiracy. It's number 207, July 28, 1975 in Carmel, California. I have a guest with me today, Ted Charach. I've mentioned his name on Dialogue Conspiracy the past 4 years. He's been important in the Robert Kennedy investigation, and his name has woven in and out of these broadcasts over that many years since I've been on this program, and even before when I was doing my research into the Robert Kennedy assassination. I have one news item to go into that I do want to do at greater length on Dialogue Conspiracy. We won't do it today because Ted's in town. I want to use the time for him. It has to do with 2 of H.L. Hunt's sons that were indicted this week in Dallas, Texas, on a wiretapping and bugging charge, wiretapping of Hunt and his employees. 7 men were indicted in Houston, Texas, including lawyer Percy Foreman and 2 sons of the late Dallas oil billionaire H.L. Hunt, and they've been charged by a grand jury of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Now, Percy Foreman is the attorney that took over the James Earl Ray case, who told Ray that if he didn't plead guilty, he would be barbecued, who forced a man who did not kill Martin Luther King to say that he killed Martin Luther King. And Percy Foreman now is indicted in Texas. The important thing that I'll go into next week is the fact of the CIA and its relationship to Lamar Hunt and H.L. Hunt, Warren Carroll, Jack Ruby, the Houston banks. And one of the charges of the Hunt brothers was that the Central Intelligence Agency infiltrated the family oil empire and used secret agents to help embezzle them out of more than $50 million from them. He is saying the Hunt oil empire was used by the Central Intelligence Agency, and they hold the CIA responsible for early charges against them, and that they spied on their late father, and the Hunt Oil Company was linked to the CIA. The Los Angeles Times this week had headline stories about the links of Mr. Rosselli, organized crime, Giacomo to the Hughes Corporation, and the links of organized crime to Hughes, the links of the CIA to these organizations, CIA to the oil people, are coming out very much in the establishment news, the wire services, the Associated Press. The United Press has put a lid on this information for 11 years since the end of World War II, the interlocking parts of the mafia, the CIA, the Hughes Corporation, and now it's coming out. And Ted is here, and we're going into our show, but recently there were 2 news items on Zodiac Press about Ted Charach, and I want to read them to you. One was June the 9th. I read it on KLRB at the time it came out. It said, a leading investigator probing the murder of Senator Robert Kennedy claims he has cracked the case regarding the missing second gun, allegedly involved in the 6-8 assassination. Former broadcast journalist Ted Charach says he is currently negotiating to purchase a so-called second gun, which has been missing for nearly 7 years. Charach says and other investigators have alleged for years that a gun other than Sirhan's was also fired in the Ambassador Hotel pantry when Senator Kennedy was assassinated. Private investigators have learned that a .22 caliber pistol, almost identical to Sirhan's, was owned by a security guard who was standing directly behind Senator Kennedy when Kennedy was shot. They have suggested the guard's weapon may have been fired. The fatal shot was struck Kennedy. Shortly after the assassination, however, the guard's gun was reportedly stolen. As a result, it has never been available for ballistic tests. I'll go on. There's more to the Zodiac News, and I won't read the whole thing because Ted is here to talk to you today. He's located and interviewed inmates in prisons in Arkansas and Missouri who admitted to stealing the weapon. The point is this, that, again, the Zodiac News Service on the July 10th carried a story of Ted's who learned that the Los Angeles police had deliberately falsified evidence in the Robert Kennedy assassination case. I won't go through, these are just 2 examples of the Zodiac News, which for years the alternative press has been carrying these stories of Ted. And we can talk about them now because, Ted, you're the first one to break with the Los Angeles Times. the big story now of the work that you've been doing. So we'll take it from here. I just want to make the point that the alternative press, up till this point, has carried these stories, the FM stations like KLRB and the other FM stations. Now the wire services, the Associated Press, United Press, and eventually CBS and NBC, they're going to have to get into this, aren't they?
Well, there's no doubt about it. As a matter of fact, CBS is getting into it very thick and heavy. CBS news correspondents have come to Los Angeles and have interviewed me regarding the Robert Kennedy case and the new developments, and in fact, Lee Townsend from CBS News, one of their chief correspondents, that I tried to enlist his support as early as 1970 May. He arrived in Los Angeles and spent several weeks there. He taped interviews with me, with his assistant, and then they requested to see the film The Second Gun. The film probe was shown to CBS News personnel at CBS Television City about 2 weeks ago. They've taken a report back to New York. I understand that they are going to explore the entire American assassination syndrome, the John F. Kennedy assassination, the Robert King assassination, Robert Kennedy rather, and the Martin Luther King, and of course the attempted shooting which crippled Governor Wallace. And this is scheduled for November 1975. As you mentioned, of course, the Los Angeles Times did something which was incredible. They have carried the entire Second Gun story on the front page
And
7 years later, after...
And 3 pages later, too, full pages.
When
yes.
we first brought out the news, when I fathered this investigation based on the developments into the alleged conspiracy and, of course, the Second Gun development, we were abused and we were ridiculed.
Tell me about it.
And
We still
there
are,
was
by
an
the-
entire news blackout on this. Now look what's happened.
The
So
laws
it's a new ballgame.
It's a new ball. For those of you who don't know Ted Charach and don't know about the Second Gun, because we pick up new listeners all the time, maybe you should explain how you got into the Robert Kennedy case, and then we'll go to a few more basic things like your movie, because we do have new people breaking in the news who don't know you. It's always surprising to me, but it's a good starting point. It's never too late to
Well,
learn.
of course, I was at the Ambassador Hotel 7 years ago as a reporter and still working in broadcast journalism and documentary film work. And I was outside the kitchen pantry when we heard the first shots. I was interviewing Bobby Kennedy's brother-in-law, Stephen Smith, and I entered the kitchen pantry and I heard the story of the so-called girl in the polka dot dress that disappeared and others involved with Sirhan. And I interviewed the witnesses that morning, and I intended to create a sound documentary based on the presidential election of 1968, the candidates, and Bobby Kennedy's aspirations for the presidency. And while doing this documentary, I began to stumble on evidence. Some of this evidence, of course, was apparent to any researcher that was doing his homework or any professional investigative reporter, and should have been even
Right on top of
noticeable to homicide detectives, because there was a conflict in the eyewitness testimony where Sirhan was standing. You know, Sirhan, of course, was placed well in front of Senator Kennedy, and Dr. Noguchi, the Los Angeles coroner, brought in the autopsy report which showed that Senator Kennedy was killed all from behind at razor contact range. So this was quite shocking to me. And then, of course, later, we had our own newsman inside the kitchen pantry that worked with me, Jeff Brent, and he had recorded an interview with Donald Shulman. Donald Shulman had worked for KNXT, the CBS television affiliate station in Los Angeles, and Shulman was talking about a guard or guards pulling their guns, and a guard firing his gun right behind Senator Kennedy, and this guard dropping to the floor. And Shulman, of course, was in a state of apprehension. Of course, he didn't know Sirhan or the guard from anyone else, but it was a very confusing situation, and no one wanted to believe Shulman. They tried to discredit him, intimidate him, and I said, well, how could a man create a story like that? So first of all, I had to establish that there was a uniformed security guard inside that kitchen pantry, or guards, and there certainly were. And contrary to the Los Angeles Police Department book on the case, the historically deceptive book, Special Unit Senator, there was a guard of extreme right-wing persuasion. So who hired this guard, and where did he come from, and was security infiltrated that night? So we began to have the threads of the master conspiracy, and where do these threads lead? And that's what interested me, And I took my tapes after 2 years of work to a well-known and respected attorney, Godfrey Isaac, and he was appalled at what he heard. At first he was skeptical. He called in the major witnesses, not only Donald Shulman, but Carl Euchre, who was the chief witness for the prosecution, May. Mr. Euchre was leading Kennedy by the hand. He said Kennedy had started to move, and that Senator Kennedy, the presidential candidate, was of course facing Sirhan, so that no gunman could get behind Mr. Euchre, who was a big man and a tall man, and was blocking, an attempted shooting at the time that Sirhan started firing. There was a pause, and Mr. Euchre grabbed Sirhan and threw him in a headlock and over the serving table, while the real hitman, a gunman, was standing behind and dropped to the floor. And people have to realize this was only 4 or 5 feet. It was a very confusing situation, and therefore we had the makings of a real-life whodunit. I took all these tapes over to a friend of mine, a fellow journalist, a documentarian, Gerard L. Kahn, and we merged our talents and services to form the first theatrical feature journalistic film, The Second Gun. There's never been a film made like this in the history of the medium.
The highlight of the Boston conference was your movie, The Second Gun. It was the highlight of the conference last January in Boston. There were a group of researchers that presented their opinions, theories, documents, or evidence, but the really highlight was there because you had it on film. You had the people, you had the police authorities, you had the gunman talking himself. The motive was there, the connections, the subtlety of the cover-up, the people whose hands we give to investigate these matters. They were all there. You could see them. They talked.
Certainly.
It's all there.
We had the documentation, and of course then I brought in two of the world-famous crime experts into this case, William Harper and later Professor Herbert McDonald of New York, Mr. Harper from Pasadena, that corroborated that 2 .22 caliber guns were involved in the assassination. Now, of course, the pressure is building up. Now, you know the trouble I had in trying to get this film before the American people. And that is why it's very important for your listeners, now that we
describe The Second Gun, because it did open in Boston, it opened in New York, and it got good reviews, nominated for a prize-winning documentary. Then it was taken off. It's been off. Now we're going to begin circulating. We want to talk about people listening to this show, writing to me and writing to Ted, and we'll tell you where to get the film in your town, whether it's New York or Sacramento or San Luis Obispo. The actual making of the film, The Second Gun, which is the story of the second gunman, a documentary, tell some of the hassles, what it was to produce a movie of this kind. This is a tremendous job when you realize the forces.
Oh, well, it was just unbelievable because, as you know, we had a lot of threats. This girl, Betty Dreyer, that was going to transcribe our tapes, 2 men came out of the dark and cut her up pretty badly and demanded to know where the Charach tapes were, which were going to be used in the film, The Second Gun. And, of course, the media was questioning our integrity and putting out malicious, irresponsible stories. There were...
Of course, let me interject. Not only was the media doing it, you talk about intelligence or counterintelligence, even your associates or my associates, the researchers, have been as big a stumbling block as the media. They must be part of it. They must be in some way insidiously linked because they have put their foot... they've tried to put you in the background, and it's been a test of your strength or courage because they had tried to pass the ball to this other person who co-opted you when the case got big.
Well, of course, you know that Bernard Fenstowald of the Committee to Investigate Assassinations must be some sort of a front organization because the time and the energies that this Fenstowald spent to try to undermine my investigation, yes, and William Harper, the crime expert, and Mr. Isaac is just unbelievable. And then Robert Blair Kaiser, the other investigator that was hooked to the Sirhan defense team, he did a character assassination job on all of us. Finally, we had enough, and we had to hit him with a $3 million libel suit. And they were putting out the worst stories and false stories, not only orally, but putting this into newspapers and magazines. It was an atrocity, and we put a stop to all this. Sirhan's own defense team, headed by Luke McKissick, sent Sirhan a letter trying to turn us into crazies and nuts, and said, Sirhan, if that gun, your gun, is refired again, it'll prove that we better not have it refired. It'll prove the bullets came from your gun, the fatal bullet. When everyone knows the fatal bullet was so fragmented in pieces that even the firearms examiner in the Los Angeles Police Department couldn't say it came from the Sirhan gun or any other gun. And he's the chief defense counsel.
This is what Percy Foreman did to James Earl Ray.
And Luke McKissick did everything to keep all this new evidence developed by my 7-year probe and the forensic work of the great criminalist Professor McDonald of New York and William Harper of Pasadena out of the courts. And now, can you imagine this, May, that they sentenced the defendant, Sirhan, with another gun? Why? Because evidently that Sirhan gun was damaged. So they thought whoever was directing the activities in there, and there are supposed to be CIA links into the criminal conspiracy section, the forerunner was a special unit senator, and they said, listen, use this gun. In other words, they'll never know the difference.
They transferred guns.
And that's right. And fire the bullets, and put these bullets into evidence and say they came from the Sirhan gun. But just like they made a little mistake and left the tape in the Watergate, inadvertently, these
they
dumb, they numbered the gun they were using, then they got caught in a fiasco. So they've created one lie after another.
Gun,
and that's when the people should be shocked, because then they put out stories. Oh, well. In other words, it's all tampering, phony evidence.
Well, didn't it begin in Dallas, Texas, where they had a German Mauser, and 24 hours later it's an Italian gun. It changed its nationality, it changed its shape, and right there. But this is years later, and people like yourself stay with it and remember the past and just stayed with what you saw in the Ambassador and pursued it. With the John Kennedy thing, when he was assassinated, the car was destroyed within 48 hours, and nobody asked any questions.
But you think the citizens of California would appeal to the governor and the Attorney General's office? Of course, Younger is the one that prosecuted Sirhan, because they say it's just an error. Even if it is an error, which we know it isn't, it's the big lie technique. Do we establish in a democratic society justice by so-called error? In other words, that you sentence defendants with another gun once you have the murder weapon? This is incredible.
Well, the attorney for Sirhan, Luke McKissick, had an interview in the newspaper, and I showed it to you, I think, last year, when the articles came out about the second gun and the autopsy discrepancies. He said, well, even if my client didn't kill Robert Kennedy, he came there with the intent to do so. Well, if Sirhan, it appears, has been programmed or hypnotized to forget what happened, we don't know if he came with the intent to kill anybody at all or just to take the rap. Oswald didn't go with the intent to kill anybody when he went to the book depository.
Well, of course, we know that hypnotism was involved in this. The painful experiences of his past exploited, and he's coached and coaxed and coerced, and they used even drugs and mysticism and hypnotism, of course. Why, those diaries not even written by Sirhan. They are allegedly forged, or he's under some sort of an influence. And, of course, there is leads in this, and there's been an investigation that's been going on. Betsy Langman in New York, that wrote the Harper's article, has brought in a famous psychiatrist, Dr. Herman Spiegel, and he says Sirhan is under a 5th degree. Of course, I'm not an expert in this, but as a layman talking, 5th degree, which is a real deep hypnotic state, and that's why Sirhan says, I can't remember. I don't know how I got there. Now, Sirhan is supposed to be highly intelligent, maybe emotionally disturbed, but he has a passionate nature, and he has an interest in what's going on, and he doesn't know how he got there, or how he fired the gun. And his mother said that if he would she'd be cutting some meat, and there'd be a little bit of blood. He'd be sensitive to that he was a highly sensitive youth, and therefore he was used as a dupe and as a decoy. And I have no doubt we were going to probably see a Jack Ruby situation. They were going to knock off Sirhan, but Kennedy backed up towards the ice machine, and the real gunman panicked and saw that, and he fired those professional shots down to up, Mary, and May, right to left, back to front. And you think he stayed in there? He got out of the room, and he got powder in his eyes. Now, the Los Angeles Police Department doesn't. He dropped his tie. And then he told the Los Angeles Police Department, I didn't get my gun out. And when the FBI came, he didn't know what they knew or didn't know. He said, when I got up from the floor, I took out my gun. And later, 16 months after the tragedy, when he wasn't aware that I was undertaking an extensive investigation and was aware what Donald Shulman saw, a security guard pulling his gun and firing his gun, and the deep powder burns all in behind Senator Kennedy's rear ear, which would show, of course, that the gun was right up there from back to front. Well, this guard, Thane Eugene Cesar, of course, admitted that he pulled that gun out instantly, just as soon as the shots were fired. And then he tells the DA investigators they don't do a lie detector test, they cover up. He pulled his gun only when he got up from the floor. So there were contradictions and variances in his stories which were not investigated. And the police said there weren't any right-wing extremists inside the kitchen pantry. And we all know that Thane Eugene Cesar is a political right-wing extremist, and I have so...
on your movie, you have a scene of him saying
yeah.
that Kennedy is giving country to the niggers.
Well, that's right. That's why people must see The Second Gun, and I urge them to get in touch with American Films. Yeah. American Films, Mr. Ray Axelrod's office at 9601 Wilshire Boulevard. That's 9601 Wilshire in Beverly Hills, Suite 512. In fact, they can phone them at area code 213-274-7185. But if they write to American Film and say, we demand to see The Second Gun film probe, you must see this sophisticated full-length feature, and you will see for yourself the evidence which is forcing Mae, because Mae is, Brussell, of course, is one of the foremost researchers in America and realizes exactly where all the strings go to, and that's why we have worked so long and so hard to cooperate and funnel everything to you, because you can see the foundation and the layers, and it is very interesting. And I feel that this film must be brought out to every community in America. There's no doubt now that the pressure is on to reopen the John F. Kennedy assassination, Martin Luther King, George Wallace, and of course, I know now that the Robert Kennedy case will be reopened, and I predict it will be reopened within less than 90 days and probably 60 days. And if it isn't open right here in through California, through the legislature, the district attorney's office now is getting the pressure. Joe Busch just died on the day he had decided.
Let me read this article in Los Angeles Times, not the whole thing, but
because there'll be a congressional investigation.
Yeah. Sunday morning, July 13, 1975, it begins just before his death on June 27th. District Attorney Joseph Busch had considered ways to reopen aspects of the case.
Amazing.
Now, that is the outline of my book, Murderville, USA. You see, Dr. Joseph Busch. Here's an article by William Farr and John Kendall. And yet nobody makes the link that Joseph Busch, who was young, died because he was going to open it up, that possibility exists. And I think don't you think so?
I think he told Attorney General Younger, and the last thing Younger wants is for this case to be reopened. After all, they knew that if anything was ever discovered in this case, if anything was ever blown, that they would be held accountable. Well, today they are accountable, and you must write Governor Jerry Brown today and say that you want him to see the Second Gun film, and you want this case reopened, and an investigation of Attorney General Younger's office and Robert Houghton, who were in charge of this investigation. And when they had the opportunity to look at this evidence, you know, it's one thing to discredit me as an investigative reporter, even though we did a highly professional journalistic investigation. They couldn't discredit Mr. Harper, the crime expert I brought into the case, because he had worked for them, the District Attorney's Office,
That's right. They couldn't discredit their
United States Naval Intelligence.
Well,
so what did they do, Mae? You know the old tricks. After all, you've researched this better than any other researcher in America. They discredited the evidence. Phony lies,
or the researcher,
saying that people could get at the evidence and tamper with the evidence. Now, this is the big lie technique. Now the pressure is on, because even though Bush went to his grave, Farr got the story out that Bush had had it enough. All this response, all the good work, all your listeners writing, Congressman, Senator Kennedy's office, writing Governor Gary Brown, now hoping that they will demand to see the film The Second Gun. It forced, I think that Joe Bush was going to inform Chief Davis. He was going to reopen the case. But Younger, of course, is getting involved with President
I call it
Ford,
Watergate West.
and he wants a political job. He doesn't want this case.
No.
And I believe that Younger and Bush were fighting over this matter because Younger put Bush up to the cover-up.
No, I'll tell you what.
In 1971, Bush had an opportunity to get at the truth and opened up, and yet they spent 5 months, and they put a lid on it. It was a whitewash of all the
See, the powers are too strong because, for one thing, Ronald Reagan said that he believed that assassinations shouldn't be told the public. They should have what they need to know. And I read on Dialogue Conspiracy your lawsuit against Chief of Police Davis and Ebel Younger a few years ago, where you say that they do not have the right to decide what we need to know. How come that lawsuit never went through? Did it just stop? What happened?
No, well, one of the reasons is I had a great deal of respect for Attorney Godfrey Isaac. And I didn't have a big enough power base, but when Attorney Godfrey Isaac, after cooperating with him over an extensive period and turning over all my materials to him, was called upon by the Sirhan family, Sirhan's mother, Mary Sirhan, to enter the case. I felt it would be in the national interest. He took the case without compensation, May, that if he was representing the defendant for a new trial, that all my investigation would be contributed in the interest of truth and justice, so the story would get out, and we could subpoena all these witnesses. So
you backed out on a case against the police officials.
Because I had hoped that Mr. Isaac, obviously Sirhan, representing Sirhan, he had a greater chance to get the case reopened based on the new evidence, because he is the defendant directly involved.
Yeah, but the problem is this. You see, you have this.
But we didn't foresee the problem of Luke McKissick.
But you see, Ted, this is the problem which you have. This is the problem that Congressman Michael Harrington has. He says, do you owe the honesty of the constituency and the laws of the land, or to the CIA, which says everything's national security and they're committing crimes and they're lying? The major lawsuit, more important at the time, that opening up Sirhan's case in that pecking order, I think, was your case on how much can the public officials hold back on criminal matters. Do they have the right to decide what we know and what we need to know?
Well,
you see, now we have Ronald Reagan, who could be our next president, and this is why I think Evelyn Young and these people are pushing forward so they can get Reagan into there. And Reagan says, you don't have the right to know. And that's what was primary in your case there, was do they have the right to decide what evidence
But I should have had support from a Concerned Citizens Committee or the ACLU.
Oh, absolutely.
And instead, there were a lot of, you were talking, they put up this Mrs. Pomerantz, and they agitated her. She's a wealthy benefactor, and she's done a lot of good. But they put her up the fence walls to agitate and create dissension between Mr. Harper and myself and Kaiser. And everybody went into Mr. Harper's house, and Mr. Harper, of course, is a brilliant man. He's a genius, but he's a man of temperament, and he's of ill health, and they confused this poor man. Of course, his scientific work stands on its own. So
Invade and divide.
So you know what I did? I brought you, a year ago, the first evidence, new evidence. I said, okay, let all these kooky people and all these plagiarists and these character assassins, and I'm sorry to say, many of them are vultures, some are irresponsible, some are sincerely motivated, but let them do all the damage they want. I presented Professor McDonald independent ballast scan photographs of the bullets, and he gave me a new affidavit which not only proved that there were two different types of guns, you see. They're two .22 caliber guns, but two guns were used in the assassination, which of course indicated a second gunman, but they were of different ammunition. But you see, you have to understand that I didn't foresee that Luke McKissick, well, I did in a way that was, I couldn't control the situation. Luke McKissick, of course, stayed in the case when Godfrey entered, and then he stayed with inside, and he began to tear at the entire fabric.
Divide and conquer.
And destroyed Mr. Isaac's representation, so that when this went before the California State Supreme Court, McKissick made sure that Isaac was eliminated from the case, and the courts never got the information, the new evidence, and they never got the fact that another gun was used. So it took another, over a year and a half to convince Mr. Isaac in good conscience to take this case. And Mary Sirhan came there crying on her hands and knees. And you know what? They have spent another year, since Isaac has been in, took his time to study this matter and bring it up. They brought in Allard Lowenstein. And Lowenstein, while coming, asked to see the film and making all kind of commitments and promises to me, and I believed in him sincerely and turned him over to other researchers, including Lillian Castellano, that's done a lot of work, and she disseminates a lot of information, and she gathers all this, and she helps everyone. And I gave him an introduction to Mr. Isaac, and he met with my associate Gerard Alcon in Beverly Hills, and he asked for all the data, all the correspondence. He'd get congressional investigation, give us media exposure, and then he put the clamp on us, and he put pressure on me to be disassociated.
That's right.
Now, behind the scenes, he says he didn't want anything to do. He didn't go to the Kennedys. He had gone to the Kennedys. He was rejected. But he said he had nothing to do with the Sirhan case. He's doing independent of the Sirhan case. Fabrication. He went in and out of Mary Sirhan's home. He sent emissaries and other people to the Sirhan family. He was and offered them funding and all the monies they would need, and he would provide all the direct help if Allard Lowenstein could get control of the Sirhan case. So we wonder what is going on here.
Well, I think one of the answers to what's going on to the Sirhan case is one of the motives came out in the Los Angeles Times. It's been the press this week. It was the fact that Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General, was furious that the Mafia and the CIA were blood brothers, that they worked together. Now, the Mafia was Sam Giancana and Rosselli, working with the Hughes Corporation, Robert Mayhew, and the other agents of the Hughes people. And in the Sirhan case, the first attorney for Sirhan was Grant Cooper, who represented Rosselli and the Mafia, who came right out of the Hughes nest.
And
so
what
Robert,
a mess that was,
what a
because
mess.
Cooper stipulated to everything, and he didn't bring in any other experts in the
So
case.
he was like Grant Cooper was to Sirhan, what Percy Foreman was to James Earl Ray. But the point is that Robert Kennedy wanted to break the CIA. His brother had ordered him as the Attorney General to get rid of the top people of the CIA after the Bay of Pigs. He didn't want the Mafia in the CIA. He didn't want the CIA, period, much less the Mafia. So now, in the can of worms, you have Sirhan used by Lockheed, the Guard. Thane Cesar comes from Lockheed, blood brother, parcel of the Hughes Corporation. He came home at 5 in the evening. His wife says, "You're supposed to guard Robert Kennedy." He was not a regular employee of Lockheed. He was what they called the maintenance man. Well, we didn't know in '68 what a plumber was in CIA terms. What's a maintenance man? A plumber? Where did he come from? You see, so the Thane Cesar links to the Hughes CIA links, I think, would be so strong, and the lawyer for Sirhan and everything, that I think the reason they tried to co-opt you or push you out is to make it a low-level plot, like just a civil organized crime, and leave the CIA Hughes Corporation out of it. See, they'll pin it on the Mafia if they have to, but not the Hughes. And this is why they're pushing you around, because you and I are not afraid to say, yeah, the Committee of 45 men ordered these murders, the President orders these murders, and put the responsibility where it is, right at the top.
Well, you know there's hanky-panky political pressures. If this isn't so, irrespective of all the new evidence, when finally, after all these years of heartaches and headaches, when Godfrey Isaac, that deserves thanks from every American, finally brings a writ before the California State Supreme Court, and the High Court is told that the defendant in this case, and they see exhibit, is sentenced not with the gun allegedly taken from him, which has a serial number H53725, but this other gun, H18602, which was destroyed by the Los Angeles Police Department a month after the assassination. And then they changed the files, Mae, because the records show that this gun was supposed to be available during the Sirhan court trial, and therefore they said, oh, it was changed. It was destroyed a year later
Serial
in July.
numbers.
But one way or another, the only gun linked scientifically to the case has been destroyed. Now, Isaac tells the High Court, and the court doesn't even comment and rejects it. So if you don't think there's political pressure
Well,
in this
how
case,
about the bullets? If there are 13 bullets and Sirhan's gun shoots 8, and the High Court doesn't take that as a fact of conspiracy.
well,
I
then
mean, you
there's
name
only
your
one
movie
thing
The
we
Second
can
Gun.
do.
How can he have...
Right now, with the Los Angeles Times, they've moved 2 stories inside of a week on this because they turned over the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, which was, they wrote me a thank you letter, that it was
That
the
was
film,
all
The
your
Second
work.
Gun.
That's right.
Yes, they called me there, they called a panel discussion, and Dr. Robert Joling, the eminent president, convened a special investigative committee, and your listeners should know that this investigative committee by the American Academy of Forensic Scientists, which is your leading scientists that testify in courtrooms, ballistics experts, crime experts, criminalists, pathologists. They have recommended not reopening the case, and of course, erroneous ballistics evidence has been introduced in the American courtroom.
Well,
and therefore, I don't deviate from what I said several years ago, that every citizen's right for a just trial under the law is now in jeopardy, because erroneous ballistics or firearms evidence has been introduced in an American courtroom, in a stellar case.
In a big...
Criminalist William W. Harper of Pasadena and the world-famous crime expert Professor Herbert McDonald of Corning, New York, they're both willing to testify. In fact, so is Lowell Bradford of San Jose, another crime expert, that concerning the extensive investigation and scientific discoveries. And this statement by Mr. Harper is very important. The science of criminalistics died too when they buried Kennedy, that those responsible get away with this complete breakdown of the legal and judiciary processes. Well-established teachings of criminalistics and forensic pathology were cast aside and bypassed in favor of a more expedient solution, and unfortunately, an erroneous oversimplification. So, who is responsible for this big whitewash? Let's bring Chief Davis and the District Attorney's Office and Eva Younger and all these aides into a hearing, and a full congressional hearing. Now is the time to write Senator Cranston, Senator Tunney, your congressman, and of course to bombard American films in Beverly Hills.
Those of you who want
get
the
the
address,
film.
we're talking pretty fast, and maybe you don't have a pencil when we started, and you didn't leave to
We
get one. In
need
the
your
meantime, write to KLRB and send a self-addressed envelope, and I'll tell you where you can get the film in your hometown. And if possible, maybe Ted Charach would come and speak to the colleges in the fall. Open it in the fall, because I know a lot of you are in summer vacation now. And have the second gun in your communities like Sacramento, Salt Lake City, Ohio, and wherever we send these tapes, get the second gun there, and Ted will get there and talk about this evidence. You know, I've been doing this conspiracy work for 11 years in the Los Angeles Times. Story broke in my family. Called me this week, and they began to believe, well, maybe there was something to the truth that I've been saying, because they don't read the Berkeley Bar, the LA Free Press, the alternative news media. But the LA Times had the story, and the thing that shocked my family the most was a picture of Robert Kennedy's coat with a sleeve cut off, and it has under it the question, how many bullet holes might be in it if it were found and the sleeve was missing. This is a very simple thing, like 13 bullets, and Sirhan's gun shoots 8.
The LA Times reports it now. When did I report it?
In 1971, Ted had a report. He says, sealed in heavy wax barrels in the Los Angeles Hall of Justice, part of records, including Robert Kennedy's clothes with the left arm sleeve missing. The description is not for public consumption. What are the former DA's motives? Now you take the take the parallels. John Kennedy's coat is locked up for 75 years.
When did we hang it
John
up?
Connally's clothing was sent to the dry cleaner so the Warren Commission couldn't use it. They cut off his sleeve. They took in Dallas the car away, the lamppost away, the street sign. The autopsy x-rays were locked up. All this important evidence. They had locked up John Kennedy's coat. You cut the sleeve.
But when
off
I brought
Robert.
this back, you think that it was some sort of cancer or disease, the way they ran from it. But now it's on the front page with pictures and proof that what I was saying is true.
And they'll say, well,
all they're saying was some crackpot
okay, now the sleeve, which if there's 13 bullets in the Ambassador, there could have been many more. So the point is that it wasn't a clear-cut case. Here was a sleeve, 13 bullets, and how could they say that an 8-bullet revolver? And the autopsy report, again, a lot of people don't know. We haven't brought it up. We only have a minute or two. The autopsy confirmed the ballistics, the difference in the bullet of Mr. Weissel and Mr. Kennedy, Senator Kennedy, right?
Certainly. Well, that's why I think that with all this new information and confirming the evidence which has been developed, people should write and phone and wire their senators or congressmen and see the second gun film. Of course, they can get in touch with Governor Jerry Brown's office in Sacramento and demand that this case be reopened, and flood the Attorney General's office and the District Attorney's office in Los Angeles. And of course, we will bring the second gun to your community, and I will come and speak there. And I suppose Mae, within limits of time, might be able to come to and discuss this right from the theater stage. So it's very important now for the people to get this second gun out into every community, because I think the truth is going to make us strong.
Thank you for coming. I'm really glad you were in Carmel. They just dropped in for one day, and I'm glad he could be here, because I was going to do the entire show on the new evidence of the second gun, but it's better for you to hear him and meet him, and I'll see you next week on Dialogue Conspiracy.